Hello, everyone. I'm Joel Hellman. I'm Dean of the School of Foreign Service, and it's wonderful to welcome you to another one of our SFS Fast Break series, 30-minute conversations on the breaking news stories around the world. We took a bit of a summer hiatus, and we're back. The campus is buzzing. Students are arriving. You may hear some cheers in the background as they welcome arriving students into their dorms. But we're going to jump right into a conversation on a very important topic, the most recent changes in engagement with the Koreas, through Trump and the Trump administration. And we have here today Victor Cha. He is Distinguished University Professor, the highest honor that we give here at Georgetown University, at the School of Foreign Service, and in the Government Department. He's also president of the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department and Korea chair of CSIS. He served as an advisor to both Republican and Democratic administrations. He served on the NSC, and he's the author of 9 books. We're going to have a moderated conversation. I'm going to be watching the Q&A function, sorry, not the chat function, the Q&A function. And if you have questions during the conversation, please put them into the Q&A function, and I will try to integrate those into the conversation so we can have a moderated conversation over the 30 minutes. That Q&A function is on the More tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So, Victor, welcome to Fast Break, and thank you very much for joining us. He's here. He's out in Hawaii, but joined us at an early time in the morning. So, first, tell us a little bit about the action, Trump's decision to pull out of this military exercise. I understand it's the largest military exercise in the world. Tell us a little bit about what it means to pull out. What's the nature of this exercise, and what are the implications of pulling out?
Sure. Happy to, and happy to be on Fast Break with you, Joel. So this is the largest, certainly the largest military maneuver exercise between the United States and Korea. They do a series of exercises through the course of a year, but this is the largest military maneuver exercise that they carry out involving, tens of thousands of troops, something like 80,000 on the South Korean side and maybe 20,000 on the U.S. side. The decision to shorten it basically shortened it from 11 days to 5 days. I mean, President Trump's statements came a day after the exercises started already. So the thing that got canceled was largely about 14 combined field training exercises were scaled down. In addition to that, there's a follow-on exercise at the end of September, that is a joint Navy and Marine Corps exercise that was also canceled, in part because the U.S. couldn't mobilize troops because of our deployments in the Middle East.
There's already a question about whether or not we're obligated to do this by any treaty, or this is a decision of the president's.
I don't know if it's obligated by treaty, but it is part of the alliance. I mean, the alliance is all about training and readiness and maintaining deterrence on the peninsula. The president is the commander in chief, so he can make the decision, as abruptly as he would like to scale down or actually cancel the exercises. But, clearly it was a surprise to everyone.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how abrupt was it? And a surprise to whom? Was it a surprise on our side, which I understand in a previous effort and Trump won, there was also a similar cancellation. And that was even news to many on our own side in the United States. How much foreknowledge was there of the decision to cancel on the US side, on the South Korean side?
I doubt that there was any foreknowledge. In 2018, 2019, when President Trump held summits with the North Korean leader, he emerged from those meetings and announced the cancellation of U.S. ROK joint military exercises right there on the spot in a press briefing. At that time, Secretary Mattis didn't know, many on the traveling team didn't know. He just kind of announced it. And this time he did a similar sort of thing. I doubt that there's anybody who really knew about it. And certainly the ally, South Korea, didn't know about it.
Well, we're going to talk about the symbolic significance of pulling out, but actually, let's talk about the impact on military readiness. How important is this exercise for the actual provision of security for South Korea and in that region?
So it's very important. I mean, I think there's no denying that. When President Trump canceled the exercises the last time during his first term in office. U.S. forces, Korea, Indo-Pacific Command, they all said publicly that they can still maintain readiness and deterrence. They can do computer simulation exercises, things of that nature. But when the exercises were reinstated during the Biden administration, later military officials came out and said, of course, it was degrading readiness when the militaries are not training. Militaries need to train to be ready, and particularly on the Korean Peninsula, where there is a regular rotation of troops on and off of the Korean Peninsula. You may have one group of soldiers that have been trained up, but then they rotate out. You get a new group of soldiers in who don't have the training, so this becomes an issue. And there's certainly a lot you can do through non-military maneuvers, through computer simulations, but it's not the same as doing military and live fire exercises. Korea is one of the few places the United States military can train doing live fire exercises. So yes, it does degrade readiness on the peninsula, and degrading readiness affects the whole question of deterrence, successful deterrence on the peninsula.
So tell us what could be gained by pulling out. How does Trump see what can be gained by pulling out? And are there issues that can be uh, justified in pulling out at this late stage in the process?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think there are two answers to this. For one, and we can't not mention this. I mean, President Trump has a particular view about military exercises with allies, whether it's with NATO allies or with Korea or other Indo-Pacific allies, and he just thinks it's very expensive, and they are. I mean, these are very expensive exercises, and he thinks in most of these cases, NATO allies or Indo-Pacific allies have big enough economies and militaries that they can do a lot of this, defense of their country on their own. That's like his core view. He's believed that for a long time. And so that certainly, I think, plays into the decision to cancel the Korea exercises. But the other element is that he is trying to get into some sort of dialogue, diplomacy, re-engage in summit diplomacy with the North Korean leader. And he believes that the North Korean leader has been respectful. That's his word. He used the word respectful to him in the sense that North Korea has not done a major intercontinental ballistic missile test or nuclear test during President's second term in office, despite the fact that there's no diplomacy. And the comparison there is to Trump's first term in office, where in the first year, North Korea did something like 20 ballistic missile tests and a nuclear test. And during the 4 years of Biden, when there was no diplomacy, despite Biden's efforts, North Korea was doing a bevy of these tests. So, in his mind, he believes the North Korean leader is showing some respect. And therefore, I think he is trying to reciprocate by canceling these exercises and hoping that this can lead to a pathway for diplomacy.
On both the issue of the cost of military exercises and on the issue of essentially acknowledging, if not rewarding, the Kim's reluctance to test more nuclear missile capacity during the Trump second term. That doesn't really explain the abruptness of the decision. Why not then, long ago, say we're not going to be doing these things anymore, and we're trying to do cost-cutting measures, and we want our allies to pay more of this. What explains the kind of the suddenness of it? Was there some value in the suddenness of it, some signaling value in the suddenness of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say. It's really hard to say why the president sometimes does what he does. I think, on the one hand, he has made very clear in statements and posting on social media in advance of his trips to Asia that he would like to meet Kim again. He said this in advance of his trip to APEC, which also happened to be in Korea, and then his meeting when he went to meet Xi Jinping. He wanted to, since he was in the neighborhood, he thought like maybe we can have a meeting. And so I think that, the timing of this exercise just happened to come up at this particular point. And the president, for his own reasons, doesn't believes these are really expensive. And then he saw an opportunity to send, I think, a concrete signal, a concrete measure, not just words, that he's serious about negotiation because of his willingness to cancel these exercises. Because the North Koreans historically have said that these exercises are provocative and that they downgrade or they erode the chances for diplomacy. Just as a side research footnote, we actually did a study on this where we looked at the statistical correlation between U.S. ROK military exercises and the prospects for diplomacy between the U.S. and North Korea. And we actually found no statistically significant correlation. That if we are doing exercises and we are in diplomacy, the exercises do not affect the diplomacy. And if we are not doing diplomacy and we do the exercises, it has no effect on whether there is more or less diplomacy. That is the research that's been done on this, but of course, what we find in the research is not necessarily what is believed in terms of policy.
Well, I look, I want to get to some of the reaction to the decision. I was a little bit surprised by the North Korea's reaction, and someone's asked about Kim's sister's essentially dismissive approach to that. What's going on there?
So the Kim's younger sister, Kim Yo Jong, yeah, her statements were basically that there's nothing that has changed. The U.S. still has a hostile policy. She made reference to the fact that even though Trump said that there was communication taking place, she said there was none. So her role in all this is really to play the bad cop. So she is the hardliner to her brother, who is the leader, who is trying to play the role of good cop or more magnanimous person. What's interesting in her statements was she said all those things. The U.S. is still hostile to us. There's no communication. There's no prospect of a meeting. But she also said, like, her brother and the president have a very good relationship, right? She said that they have a very good personal relationship. And that's something that Trump believes as well. So she definitely left the door open to the possibility of this Trump effort at diplomacy to re-engage. She definitely left the door open, even as she restated sort of the standard hostile North Korean talking points about the United States.
So tell us a little bit about what you think the implications of that positive, friendly relationship between Donald Trump and Kim has been for North Korea's actions on its nuclear capacity and its nuclear threat. You mentioned in your earlier answer that during his second term, there has not been the testing that we had seen during the Biden administration or during the first term. Are there advantages that you have seen and that can be identified from the apparent closeness between the two leaders? And does this action of pulling out, do you think it will do anything to further efforts to restrain North Korea's nuclear posture?
So, a couple of points. The first is um, if one of our goals, the United States, is to stop nuclear tests and missile demonstrations, particularly the intercon long-range missile demonstrations, um, in the broader scheme of things, the Trump presidencies have been an aberration. And what I mean by that is that, in the research that we've done on this, the best way that we are able to modulate or degrade North Korea's weapons demonstrations is when we are in diplomacy with them. That is what we have found empirically when the United States, whether it was during the Clinton administration, the George W. Bush administration, Obama, Biden, so on, when we are talking to the North Koreans, they definitely suppress the amount of missile testing and nuclear testing that they do. And when we're not talking to them, it goes through the roof, like it just skyrockets. But the one aberrant period is Trump. In Trump 1 and in Trump 2, in Trump 1, despite the first year when the two were going at each other rhetorically, Trump called him Rocket Man. The North Koreans said they have 5 targets in the United States, these sorts of things. Um, After they had summit meetings, there was very little North Korean weapons testing. And then it went up during Biden when there was no diplomacy. And as we said, in the first year and a half or so of Trump, there's been none of this, none of these demonstrations. So it is there is something. It's not clear how much it'll accomplish, but there is something in this symmetry, right? Trump is the first U.S. president ever to do this, that has affected North Korean behavior in a way that we have not measured before. Now, those summits, those first summits during the first term, didn't amount to anything, right? I mean, North Korea didn't denuclearize, nothing happened. But he clearly wants to take another run at this again. Maybe in part, in answer to your previous question, Joel, in part, the suddenness of this is he also wants to take the headlines off of Iran, because he's not really getting very far in it. And, people around him have said he's quite tired and bored and frustrated with it. So maybe he wants to take attention off of that. But I think he understands that this is really a burgeoning military threat. They have scores of nuclear weapons. They have enough fissile material for hundreds of nuclear weapons. I think their goal is they want to be a nuclear weapon state the size of France or Great Britain, 250 nuclear weapons. They have seven different delivery systems for these weapons, and they're working on undersea nuclear delivery capabilities. This is a burgeoning threat, and I think Trump understands that, and he figures he's got to get at this in some way. And he believes in personal relationships with these leaders, and he feels like he has one with the North Korean leader.
Well, look, there are a lot of questions about the regional implications of this decision and the relationship between Trump and Kim for, you name it, relations with China, relations between China and the DPRK, Taiwan, Japan, and we'll get to actually South Korea. But can you give us just a quick sort of tour of what you think the regional implications are of this
Yeah.
move?
Sure. So probably the most unhappy ally in all this is Japan, because um, Japan is under the biggest existential threat to Japan right now really is North Korea. They have hundreds of short-range ballistic missiles that are deployed, operational, that could attack Japan or US bases in Japan. The Japanese government has no illusions that North Korea is interested in anything close to denuclearization. So the decision by the US president suddenly to cancel exercises and try to seek a diplomatic path for North Korea, for Japan, I think would be very concerning and very worrying, because not only does that affect their security, but there is also the concern that, well, and maybe at some point Trump will say something about us, right? Meaning Japan. So, with regard to China, I think what's interesting here is under normal circumstances, I think the Chinese would be very concerned about the American president and the North Korean leader becoming closer, because China likes to be the one that has influence over North Korea, and they don't like it when anybody else has influence over North Korea. So the first time Trump engaged in diplomacy with North Korea, up until Trump's announcement that he was going to meet Kim, the Chinese leader had not met with the North Korean leader at all. But after Trump's announcement, he met with the North Korean leader five times, right? And then after the diplomacy failed, he stopped meeting with the North Korean leader. So normally the Chinese are not in favor of it, but I think actually this time um, the um, the Chinese, I think, are in support of a Trump-Kim meeting, for two reasons. One is um, Trump in his second term is much more unpredictable when it comes to the use of military force than he was in his first term. The Chinese don't want Trump to think about doing in Iran or Venezuela in their neighborhood. So anything that can cause the North Korean leader and the U.S. president to talk to each other, they probably, at this point, this moment, see as a good thing. The second reason, I think, is though the Chinese don't state it publicly, they are also very concerned about the growing alliance between North Korea and Russia, and the alliance, particularly with regard to fighting against Ukraine. There have been press reports that North Korea and Russia are talking about an additional 50,000 troops going from North Korea to Russia for the war in Europe. And so anything that pulls Kim away from Putin, like a Trump-Kim meeting, I think the Chinese, again, at this moment, not normally, but at this moment, would be in favor of. And for the Russians, I don't think they like this at all. I mean, they have developed since November of 2022 a very healthy arms and soldiers for cash and weapons and who knows what else relationship with North Korea, and they don't want anybody intervening in that. So it's kind of a mixed reaction around the region.
Well, we haven't spoken about South Korea's reaction and President Lee's reaction, who's in an unusual position, obviously, because of the shift that he would like to see in policy towards North Korea. But tell us what the statements have come out of South Korea and what you think it means for U.S. Korean South Korean relations.
So the announcement that the president made about canceling military exercises, within the same paragraph, he also dissed South Korea, the ally, saying that, we asked them for help in Iran and they wouldn't give us help. And there's some difficult commercial disputes now with South Korea. The investment and trade agreement is not getting off the ground, the $350 billion investment and trade agreement. Um, so optically, it looked pretty bad, right? Dissing the ally and then trying to entice the adversary into a negotiation. And this is what the press said and everything. But having said all that, um, the President Lee, as you said, Joel, is very much in favor of trying to get dialogues restarted again on the Korean Peninsula. He too doesn't want to see the United States think about doing an Iran or a Venezuela in North Korea. And so, if this actually leads to some sort of dialogue for the South Korean president, he's actually supportive of that. So he's kind of bit his tongue on sort of the dissing that the president has done of South Korea in public to basically see the results. So he's, in a sense, he's quite transactional about this. He's like, okay, fine. Um, Trump is unhappy with the commercial disputes, some of these other things. Those will eventually get resolved, and then he won't talk about them anymore. But the bigger thing thereafter is to see dialogue restarted, and if Trump can engineer that, make that happen, they're willing to accept that. And then also, President Trump too, who values these personal relationships, even though he may be unhappy with Korea in one respect, he does say he has a good relationship with the South Korean president. And then if you talk to the Pentagon people, their talking point on South Korea is a model ally because they're willing to spend 3.5% of their GDP on defense. They are doing more and more to develop their own defense capabilities. So again, it's kind of mixed messaging, but in the broader scheme of things, South Korea has their eye on the key strategic ball, which is if this Trump effort can lead to diplomacy, that can help stabilize the security situation in and around the Korean Peninsula.
I understand President Lee's response, and you say it's a really interesting position that he's in. Just give us a sense, though, if we were going to scan the South Korean press the day after the announcement, is there outrage? Is there analysis? I mean, what is the broader response beside President Lee's strategic and transactional response to the dissing of the ally, as you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, the United States by far is the most important country to South Korea. It's the key military ally, it's the key trading partner. South Korean industry has made the strategic decision in key and cutting edge technologies like semiconductors, EV batteries, quantum computing to make all the investment in the United States, not China in the United States. So South Korea is a key strategic ally. So when the American president goes out and says things about Korea in the same breath that he talks nicely about North Korea, that clearly does not go over well, right? It does not go over well. South Korean public, it really makes the public diplomacy people at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul earn their money, right, to try to explain this all away because still in the South Korean public, overwhelmingly, like in the over 80 plus percentile, favorable view of the United States, right? So yes, it's not optically, it's not good. In the press, of course, it's very difficult for the Korean administration when the U.S. ally is doing this. But at the same time, I think, those are the headlines, but the analysis pieces say, well, look, if this actually leads to some sort of dialogue, then that's a good thing, right? Because right now, we had no dialogue. We've had no dialogue with North Korea, arguably for, let's see, 8 years, like almost 8 years. There's been no serious dialogue with North Korea, really, since the last summits in 2019 during the Trump administration. We're talking about now 7 years where there's been no dialogue, and meanwhile, the nuclear and missile program is just continuing to grow.
Well, look, in the last few minutes, I want to ask you a question that you alluded to a little bit earlier, which is the difference in the response to Iran's nuclear program versus North Korea's nuclear program. North Korea's nuclear program obviously is far more advanced, far greater risk in the region and beyond the region. And yet, obviously, the policy that Trump is exercising in Iran, no nuclear weapon in Iran, is very different than the policy of diplomacy and friendship with a far greater nuclear risk. You wrote a piece in the Washington Post just about that. Tell us a little bit about how you see the difference.
Yeah, so it is interesting because Trump right now is taking two opposite policy positions on Iran and North Korea. As you said, very absolutist on Iran. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. But in the case of North Korea, just the other day he specified a number of nuclear weapons that North Korea has, and he says there's no denying they have them, right? Basically, de facto admitting that he's dealing with a country that's a nuclear power, but he wants to negotiate with them. And so the question is why does the United States take these two different positions? And I think there are a couple of answers. One is that in the case of Iran, they don't have a nuclear weapons program. They had a nascent program, and Trump basically tried to take it out before it could grow. Whereas in the North Korean case, they have scores of weapons dug under in places we don't know, makes it very hard to take it out. The second is that our allies in the two cases have quite different positions, right? In the case of Iran, the ally is Israel, and they're very much in favor of military action on Iran, and they're also willing to absorb military retaliation from Iran in a conflict for the price of going after any nuclear capability. That is not the case in South Korea. South Korea is dead set against any sort of military action and is not willing to absorb any sort of provocation. There are a number of other potential explanations for this, but these are two of the most important ones.
Well, look, I'm just going to ask you for a 30-second response because we're going to close on this. What should we look for? What do you think is going to happen in a Trump-Kim summit? Will it happen? And what do you think is going to come out of it?
So I do think it will happen. I mean, just because of the sheer will of President Trump and his constant pushing for this, I think it will happen. I don't think it will happen if we look at it on the North Korean side. I think their calculation probably is we have the most leverage if we do this after the U.S. elections in November, where they suspect that the president's party will not do well. And at least in their minds, they will feel that Trump is weaker. So I would expect that if this happens, it's going to happen towards the end of this calendar year and not earlier in the fall. And what's to be gained from it? We're not going to get denuclearization, that's for sure. But if there is some effort at trying to reduce the threat, avoid accidental military conflict, do something to attenuate the tie with Russia, between North Korea and Russia. If we could accomplish any of these things or start making steps in these directions, that would be a very good thing.
Victor Shaw, thank you so much. A great and comprehensive view of a fast-breaking event, which is what we're all about here at SFS. And we hope to see all of you again for the next fast break when comes, when any kind of very, very interesting, important news is on the headlines. And we will be linking up again with our faculty members in the near future. So it's great to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Victor Cha, and I wish you all the best for the remaining weeks of this summer. Take care.